The following is part of the Emmy Award-winning series, The Connecticut Experience, a collaboration of the Connecticut Humanities Council and Connecticut Public Television. Puerto Rican Passages explores the rich history and culture of Connecticut's Puerto Rican community. The production of Puerto Rican Passages and its related public programming have been made possible in part by grants from the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, Greater Bridgeport Area Foundation, and Fundación Puertorriqueña de las Humanidades.
The plane we arrived in was old, made of pieces of wooden boards. It was raining so hard. We arrived at the camp there at 3 in the morning. They bring them from Puerto Rico to sell them here with a contract, migrating. $10 and go. Let the wind kill you.
500,000 Puerto Ricans traversed the Atlantic to get to the U.S. mainland during the peak migration years following World War II. Most traveled to the New York City area, 1,600 miles from Puerto Rico and light years from the culture they left behind. Soon, nearby states, such as scenic Connecticut, became the setting for a growing Puerto Rican population, now the largest minority in many of its cities. The Connecticut story provides a living example of an ethnic community constantly developing and adapting to a new and changing environment. But because of their homeland's unusual relationship with the United States, their tenacious protection of culture and unique history, this American group continues to elude simple definition and is often misunderstood. Who are Connecticut's Puerto Ricans? What place have Puerto Ricans found for themselves in Connecticut? This is their story. Connecticut, a land of rolling hills and snowy winters, a symbol of old New England. Puerto Rico, a tropical island about the size of Connecticut, for 500 years a colony of Spain, then of the United States.
Puerto Rico was originally inhabited by the Arcay Indians who lived here about 4,000 years ago, but later, about 2,000 years ago, the Arawak Indians from South America arrived to the islands. The Indians were really exterminated less than 100 years after the Spanish conquest. Christopher Columbus had already arrived here in Puerto Rico the 19th of November of 1493. The Aboriginal population disappeared very rapidly, not only because of the war against the Spaniards trying to obtain their freedom, but also because of the diseases that the Europeans brought with them.
The indigenous people were known as Taino, and they called their island Borinquen. They mixed with the Spaniards and African slaves. The Spanish permitted racial mixture. After all, their lineage was made up of Celts, Iberians, Moors, Jews, and others. The Taino, Africans, and Spanish peasant farmers on Borinquen, known as Jivaros, all became Borinqueños, part of the island's cultural fabric. Puerto Rico's strategic location was important to the Spanish Empire, but in the early 1800s, it was agriculture that provided the economy. Cash crops such as sugar and coffee promoted economic relations and established trade routes between Puerto Rico and the United States. Puerto Ricans followed such trade routes to Connecticut in search of the Gold Line streets. This 160-year-old Bridgeport house was once located in the neighboring suburban town of Stratford. It was known as the De Rivera House. Jose de Rivera, a wealthy sugar and wine merchant, came to live here with his wife and 6 children in 1844. In New Haven, the 1861 city directory shows Augusto Rodriguez was one of several Puerto Ricans living there. When the Civil War broke out, he was one of the first to enlist in the 2nd Connecticut Regiment and saw action in the First Battle of Bull Run. He signed up again for the 15th Connecticut Regiment and became a lieutenant. After the war, he returned to New Haven and fought fires instead of wars. But Rodriguez was the exception. Most Puerto Ricans of the late 1800s were trying to survive back on the island.
Van a sazonar el café al gusto de ustedes.
101-year-old Maria Morales of New Haven still prepares Puerto Rican coffee the way she learned in the 1890s when the Spanish ruled Puerto Rico.
¿Cuándo naciste?
Eso es lo que yo no sé.
While some memories may be as cloudy as her coffee, she hasn't forgotten how she lived on the island.
Vivíamos en una casa hecha de mano.
We lived in a house made by hand from native wood. And how happy we lived. We grew rice, corn, beans. Well, what we ate was what one cultivated. The Spanish? Well, some Spanish were bad. Others, no. Others were good. The poor were down-to-earth people.
In 1898, because of the Spanish-American War, United States invaded Puerto Rico and took Puerto Rico as a colony. At that time, we were in peace. We were celebrating the autonomy that had been granted by Spain. We were not at war, as it was Cuba. But nevertheless, since that moment, Puerto Rico became a territory, a colony of the United States.
We were shouting and singing because we were free.
In 1917, Puerto Ricans were made American citizens, and more than 18,000 Boriguas served the U.S. military. After the war, some remained in the United States. Most, however, returned to Puerto Rico, where they continued to encounter hostile conditions.
Nosotras nunca supimos lo que fue baile.
We never knew what a dance party was. Our festivities were through the Catholic Church. We'd come home from church, change our clothes, eat, work on the farm until evening. Understand?
Hasta por la tarde.
Hurricanes ravaged an already devastated island. Infant mortality rates injured the very soul of the Puerto Rican people.
Cojan ese niño, póngalo en el banco para que su madre tenga algún descanso. Adiós, angelito, adiós, adiós.
40% unemployment assured a life of want from cradle to grave. Simply staying alive became a challenge. Furthermore, peasant farmers and large landowners who once owned 93% of the land growing American after-dinner treats, such as sugar, coffee, and tobacco, were replaced by major corporations. This was the heyday of United States investments and American colonialism. In response to the difficult conditions, young and rural Puerto Ricans first migrated from mountains to the cities and towns of the coast. Since the early 1900s, the more adventurous took their entire families across the world to cut cane in Hawaii or pick cotton in Arizona. After World War I, the U.S. severely restricted European immigration, but Puerto Ricans, who are now U.S. citizens, began migrating in increasing numbers to provide labor for factories and farms. By 1920, the majority of all Puerto Rican migrants were going to New York City. A trickle began to find their way into Connecticut. In June of 1927, Adalberto Perello graduated from a Puerto Rican high school. 2 days after graduation, he was on a boat headed for the United States. He followed a cousin and a brother to the small town of Meriden and was only the fourth Puerto Rican in that New England community.
Figured, well, I said, if I stayed in Puerto Rico, it'll be $10 a week. Came here, $33 a week. So I came out to $33. There was nothing discrimination. People didn't even know that Puerto Rico existed. They didn't know where Puerto Rican was. I talked to lawyers and doctors. They asked me if Puerto Rico was near the Philippines.
In 1936, in New Haven, the nucleus of the modern Puerto Rican community arrived when the New Jersey branch of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company transferred 8 Puerto Rican employees.
Vengo a decirle adiós a los muchachos, porque pronto me voy para la guerra, que aunque vaya a pelear en otra tierra, voy a salvar mi derecho, mi patria y mi fe.
During World War II, Puerto Ricans played a major part in both the armed services and war-related work. They were recruited to work in places such as Electric Boat in New London and Remington Arms in Bridgeport. They were the latest of many ethnic groups to find work in Connecticut's industrial economy. Newspapers often treated Puerto Ricans as a curiosity. The Bridgeport Post, 1947.
They're a clannish, gregarious people who, as a rule, stay away from the Employment Bureau. They're independent people who get jobs through word of mouth.
El negrito bonito no encuentra trabajo, está atolondrado, se siente muy bajo. Un tipo muy listo le dice al bonito que allá en Nueva York todo es mejor, no se pica caña.
A lot of the people in Puerto Rico by the 1930s had been growing in their discontent with the domination that the sugar interests had in the Puerto Rican economy. Puerto Ricans saw themselves as dependent on the worst kind of work, sugarcane cutting. Manufacturing jobs, modern jobs in cities became the attractive feature of the new economic model. So that both in terms of the political aspect and the economic aspect for the people of Puerto Rico, agriculture in the more traditional way as it was defined had been something of the past.
The new economic model was a U.S. program called Operation Bootstrap, which industrialized the island by offering companies tax exemptions and access to American markets.
In the late 40s and 50s and 60s, Operation Bootstrap was established by Governor Muñoz Marin in order to fight the first problem of Puerto Rico, that was unemployment, and many factories were established in the islands in order to raise the standards of living of the Puerto Rican.
But the government planners identified one factor that for them contributed to the issue of poverty as they saw it. That is what they define as population surplus. The Puerto Rican population had grown from about 1 million people at the beginning of the century to more than 2 million half a century later. So that attacking the issue of population growth was essential. No matter how many factories were brought to Puerto Rico, they said, we will still have unemployment. So how do we attack this? First, by encouraging Puerto Rican migration to the United States.
Also, because of the end of the Second World War, there was a lot of opportunities in the United States of work, and many of the people in Puerto Rico that were unemployed and that used to live in the countryside went to the United States to find better employment there than here in Puerto Rico.
What once was a trickle of migrants to the United States became a flood as the Puerto Rican government actively recruited workers for several states, including Connecticut.
The Department of Labor in Puerto Rico would go around in sound trucks, encouraging people to meet at a specific place, and then would literally send them, often the next day, to Bradley or to LaGuardia or to Logan airports, where they would be picked up by somebody representing the Departments of Labor in that specific state, and would bring them to the farms.
The Shade Tobacco Growers Association was looking for Puerto Ricans who were strong, healthy, and willing to work on arrival. Thousands of laborers were housed in northern Connecticut and Massachusetts camps. Many of the men left extended families to come and do back-breaking work in apple orchards and tobacco farms. Workers often learned that contracts might say one thing, but the reality was quite different.
They didn't have no privacy in the camps. Especially people have to live above the other, and they didn't have no separate door so they can have the privacy there or whatever. And also inside of the bath system, their room was completely in a hurt condition. It was terrible. At lunchtime, some people used to get sick. Or they have that kind of small kind of sardine, slab of bread, and an orange. I just came from Puerto Rico to here was 75 cents an hour. 100 years, those brown have the same type of chemical product. That's why you saw a lot of people, especially poor people, with skin cancer.
According to files in the Puerto Rican archives in San Juan, many of the recruited were misunderstood, labeled as dummies, and shipped to farms across the country. Among the recruits was Artemio Borges Lopez, Contract C-5886 of San Lorenzo, who arrived at Camp Bradley, Connecticut in 1954. In his letters to the Department of Labor, Lopez wrote,
I suffer from ulcers and I feel a lot of pain all over my body, and I have an itch that's destroying me. When I go to the bathroom, my body drains blood, and I'm without a penny to return to Puerto Rico. I don't want to die here, and I have 9 orphan children and a second wife who I can't send any money to. So please do something for me because my company does nothing to help.
We came to Connecticut because my father was hired as a chaplain for the migrant workers. My dad would take all of us to the, when he went to the camps, he would take the whole family, the 5 of us, because the men were so lonely and those camps were so barren. They were awful, you know? And I remember packaging, like care packages with toothbrushes and towels and toothpaste and just the most basic needs. And he'd fill his whole station wagon up with stuff, and we'd spend most of our evenings just kind of talking to the migrant workers in the tobacco camps.
A lot of the people who came to work in this area, picking tobacco, and in the nurseries and in the fruit farms, often ended up in Hartford and taking over the neighborhoods that had belonged to the French Canadians, to the Irish, as they moved out of the cities.
After the war, we had a major role in providing basically a cheap workforce for some of the industries that were already beginning to have some problems, the hotels, the services, the garment industry, and so on.
Exactly, the 15th day of August, 1950.
How do you remember that date?
Well, those are days that one doesn't forget. It's more or less a new experience.
When Alex Lopez arrived, he lived in a Naugatuck boarding house with the other 20 or so Puerto Ricans who lived in the area.
A lot of time was spent playing music, singing, drinking, and playing cards. And almost always, especially on weekends, people stay up until daybreak. Someone once said, "This is the house of the devil. No one can live here." The name stuck. The house of the devil.
Often those who weren't Puerto Rican grew to appreciate the food, the culture, and the people.
I can't say anything bad about the Americans. No, black or white. I am telling you, I was called the sweetie of the building. You know why? Because I was always dancing and singing for them. They understood what I said with my happiness and dancing. They enthusiastically applauded and danced too. See?
But all too often, Puerto Ricans were strangers in their new land.
Very painful, very painful. Because I'm the darkest one in the family, I almost felt that I was keeping my family from getting decent housing. Because as soon as they saw me, they refused housing.
Various times, I also met people who took advantage of me because my English was not so good.
The initial jobs, I went to a factory. Of course, I was told, get out of there. They didn't want my kind there. I got a lot of jobs washing dishes, and jobs delivering clothes. But those are jobs that any average American boy would have. It didn't happen because I was Puerto Rican.
When I started on the flea market down the street. I was with 65 dealers. I was the only Puerto Rican there, right? And I fought them until I win. They used to burn my trucks. I used to go and buy one. They used to burn the second one, buy another one. They used to call me over their house. We're gonna kill you. I said, come down. I'm down the flea market here. I'm all alone. Just come right down if you want to kill me. And I stay there, and I stay there. And from there, I move here. And from here, I'm gonna move across the street. I got 6,000 square feet across the street.
In the 1950s, 40,000 Puerto Ricans were coming to the mainland each year. 1/4 of the Connecticut Puerto Rican population was from New York. People escaping crime and urban blight, chasing the American dream of a home in the country.
Yo tengo ya la casita que tanto te prometí, tan llena de margaritas para ti, para ti. Será un idilio de amores, será una cosa ideal. Y entre romances y flores formaremos nuestro hogar. Ahora seremos felices, ahora podremos cantar aquella canción que dice así, con su ritmo tropical.
I grew up in El Barrio, and I lived in East Harlem, and so Hartford seemed very neat and clean and beautiful, very beautiful, and quiet. It was quite a change culturally and socially for me, because I lived as a Puerto Rican New Yorker, and here I was smack dab in New England.
What happens in chain migration, and has happened for a lot of Puerto Ricans, is that maybe one person will go over from a town. For example, in the case of Meriden, a lot of people started coming from the town of Aguada, Puerto Rico. And once the first people came over, they wrote and called back to their relatives on the island and told them that there was work in Meriden, and then they came over.
Juanito Sola is originally from Aguada. He and his late wife Bertha moved to Meriden, where they spent more than 35 years, all the while dreaming of the day when they would return to Aguada.
Yo que quería que nuestro hijo naciera en Estados Unidos. Mi hermano Tony vivía en Connecticut y entonces yo decidí ir a Connecticut a vivir.
¿Por qué te sientes malo ahora? ¿De qué piensas?
Mi esposa.
¿Que no está aquí contigo?
Perfecto. Sí. Fue una gran compañera y siempre la he echado muy de menos.
¿Tú crees que ella está contigo ahora, aquí viviendo contigo?
Bueno, por lo menos es mi inspiración.
Just as Aguada, Puerto Rico, and Meriden, Connecticut are linked, so are Loíza and the city of New Haven. In the tradition of their ancestors, every year, residents of New Haven link the old and new communities with the Festival of St. James, using African-rooted bomba music to celebrate their religious and racial heritage.
As soon as they've gotten here and they found that they didn't have the kind of religious or commercial services that they were used to, they recreated them. They established stores which became not only places to buy tropical fruits and vegetables, but also informal travel agencies and brokers and interpreters and job placement agencies and so forth.
When I realized the bad situation, I left my studies and began to work for political, social, and civic causes.
My mother started visiting me. She stayed in New York City, and she wanted to make pasteles. Do you know about pasteles? We have to have them for Christmas. And she says, where am I going to get bananas for pasteles? And I said, well, you might get some green ones at the regional market, because I don't think there are any Puerto Ricans here. And I went to the regional market, and they said, green bananas? Good heavens, no one eats green bananas. But it wasn't long before I saw on the corner of Willis and Main a station wagon. And it was filled with green bananas and yautía, ñame. And I said, there are Puerto Ricans here.
Puerto Rican social clubs, softball leagues, and traditional festivals to preserve culture became a part of the Connecticut landscape. Puerto Ricans worked in Guilford foundries, toiled in Meriden silver industry, sweat in the brass mills of Waterbury, produced tools in New Britain's factories, and labored in Willimantic's textile mills. American Thread was the largest producer of thread in the world.
They would send agents down and hand out handbills and put advertisements out, go to employment offices in Puerto Rico. That was one method of securing workers. Another method was to work through families and through churches. The Puerto Rican population that came here, the women would come into the mill and would be trained by other Puerto Rican women who were already in the mill or Puerto Rican men. Their contribution is the en masse work of this labor force that created the product that really clothed America.
In Meriden, steady jobs at local factories such as the International Silver Company provided an economic base for a model community. Meriden boasted the first elected Puerto Rican city council member. Adalberto Perello of Meriden was the state's first known Puerto Rican policeman, lieutenant, and captain. Also, Meriden started one of the first local Latin American organizations.
The majority of the people were coming from one hometown. And they were very prosperous in accomplishing many of those tasks that we were accomplishing. And secondly, of course, our participation in the local government and the availability of jobs and the community's acceptance. Those factors were very influential in the degree of progress that we had accomplished during all those years.
Meriden Puerto Ricans first developed a sense of community at St. Rose Church. But in other cities and towns, Puerto Ricans had problems worshiping. Some Catholic churches refused to accept them, and others allowed them only into their basements. Father John Blackhall of St. Cecilia's Church in Waterbury says that at first, Puerto Rican Catholics had no place they could call home.
All I could think of was the scripture text of, sheep without a pastor. The role of the church in the life of the people was very, very obvious, and there was that need.
By 1957, Waterbury Puerto Ricans had established Spanish-language masses. In many cities, Pentecostal and other Protestant churches also became community centers for religious and social activities. Puerto Rican women would play a major role in community building.
Not only was the Puerto Rican woman contributing to her family economically, but she was still the primary provider of nurturing for the children and raising of the children, and primary provider of the cultural things that needed to be preserved in the family.
I have a great mom, People have to understand that poverty does not make mama less. In so many cases, it makes her more. Mothers from a poor environment seem to be extremely protective of their children, and our women are very much that way. So my mom was very protective of me. She was very strict. So I went to school.
Maria Sanchez, store owner and Hartford leader, later became the area's first Latino state representative. She was one of the founders of a 1964 beauty contest and procession, which would later become the Puerto Rican Parade. The sounds of a successful developing Puerto Rican community could be heard back on the island. In 1966, it was loud enough to draw a newly married 14-year-old barely out of grammar school.
Como yo era una niña, tenía un cuerpo de niña, aunque estaba casada, pero tenía un cuerpo de niña todavía.
Since I had a little girl's body, even though I was married, I made up my face with a lot of makeup, put on some very high-heel shoes, and I went to town to find a job. It was quite funny. I looked funny because it was hard to walk in those high heels. Thank God I found work.
I would say in Spanish, maybe que sobramos en todas partes. You could say we're always in the wrong place at the wrong time.
While there have been many individual success stories, the American dream in general eluded this group. Connecticut's Puerto Rican population grew to 37,000 by 1970, but Connecticut's industries, such as the thread, silver, and defense industries, went into a sharp decline. In Willimantic, the thread mill began laying off. Unemployment among Puerto Ricans in Willimantic rose to 28%. Alex Lopez worked at Scoville in Waterbury for 34 years before it closed down.
Para mí es como un dolor en el alma porque realmente este sitio fue de donde yo viví y venía.
For me, this hurts my heart. Realistically speaking, it was my second home. Scoville was the heart of the city of Waterbury. When I started working here, 8,000 people work here. Those who suffer the most among minorities were the Puerto Ricans.
The Waterbury Redevelopment Agency tonight begins interviewing developers for its Central Business District proposed redevelopment project, a $15 million project. Before me is a model of that project for purposes of orientation. This is the Waterbury Green, South Main Street, Bank Street, and Grand Street.
Urban renewal bulldozed many of the low-rent inner-city neighborhoods where Puerto Rican communities were developing. Some believed the motivation was not just land development, but also fear of growing Puerto Rican political power.
Motor City came and they started working on the community, and they started breaking down the buildings and paying the people who live there, giving them money to get out.
As our numbers grew and the jobs became scarcer, animosity towards the Puerto Rican community began to build. And when that animosity translated to discrimination and denial of rights that we have as citizens, the need for militancy then grew. The Young Lords was a militant Puerto Rican organization that sought to organize our community to defend our democratic rights within the United States and also to fight for Puerto Rican independence. We organized the first free breakfast program in the city of Bridgeport for our kids. We also did some lead testing, and we headed a number of rent strikes. At the time, that was a big issue. There were no laws that protected tenants, and landlords were throwing people out on the street indiscriminately.
Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire. The time for hesitation's through. There's no time to wallow in the mire. Darling, we could only lose. In the Connecticut River Valley, farm workers were demanding better pay and better working conditions. Eventually, the workers organized and brought attention to the problems.
The health condition, the lack of orientation, of community awareness, the isolation of the workers, the limitation to visit the workers in the camps.
I almost feel like we're damned if we do, and we're damned. If we do well, and then we start organizing and insisting on better working conditions and better pay, then what happens is that other people are interested. And the more automation that you had in the farms, the less strenuous a job was seen. At times of recessions, Puerto Ricans were often replaced by kids, by high school kids, and by other groups who now wanted those jobs.
The contract workers program shrank dramatically in years to come, and companies moved operations to countries such as Brazil. When President Lyndon Johnson vowed a war on poverty, Puerto Rican organizations fought for a share of federal support. Community-based Latino organizations were formed to take on issues such as education, jobs, and the lack of housing.
I think it will be a disaster, a catastrophe here in our community, really, because, we need action, a rapid action, to have better improvement in this overcrowded situation of living in this slum and this ghetto of the north end of Hartford.
It was discovered that a lot of Latino children were not going to school, and if they were not learning. They were generally relegated to the back of the classroom, where they were considered problem children.
The conditions here begin to look more and more like the conditions that they had to run away from, so that the calculation of where it's better to be gets more and more difficult to make.
Reverse and circular migrations began as Puerto Ricans left the mainland to go back to the island of enchantment, as many homesick Puerto Ricans would call it.
And I think the reason that they did that is that you can only take so much rejection here, and you can always get on the plane, put the hang-ups in a 50-cent locker, get down to some one-clear hang-ups, go back to the States, go back, pick up the hang-ups again, and come back into the system.
But for some, going back was a fulfillment of a dream.
Cuando yo llegué, lo primero que hice fue hacer mi casa aquí, que la hice frente al mar, porque ese era uno de mis sueños dorados y lo quería realizar. Y luego compré la finca y tengo 2, 3 personas trabajando en la finca, la hemos cercado y poco a poco estamos comprando reses. Socialmente también, pues para nosotros mejor, porque por el idioma, por las costumbres, por los amigos desde niños, los compañeros de escuela, los maestros, que nunca se olvidan de uno. Y uno tampoco se olvida de ellos.
Nereida Centero missed her parents and went back to Puerto Rico within a year. But despite Operation Bootstrap, Centero, like many others, could not find employment on the island. She returned to New London in 1974 and was among an increasing number of migrants moving to Connecticut's smaller cities and towns.
Now, you walk fine in high heels?
Oh, yes, perfectly.
Centero, who is standing firm now, says she returned with her family for the same old reasons and some new ones.
Here, I found study and work opportunities, as well as medical opportunities for my husband.
Most Connecticut Puerto Ricans decided to give the Northeast a chance. They became increasingly committed to the state and decided to be more politically active and involved in trying to find solutions to the state's problems.
You mentioned the word bilingual education, and it's like if you said a dirty word, everybody runs, and it creates a lot of emotions and a lot of chaos, I will say.
Bridgeport State Representative Edna Garcia stirred a hornet's nest when she suggested reforming the bilingual education program.
If he's so fine, Why are we graduating kids who can't speak English?
I don't believe that we could keep a kid in bilingual education for more than 2 years.
When detractors say that in 2 years the children should be reading English at grade level, even though they came speaking no English, I ask how many American kids in public schools who speak only English in 2 years are reading English at grade level.
Differences like these shape the diverse opinions of today's Puerto Ricans. One of the more heated debates in this community concerns bilingual education, a special transitional curriculum for non-English speaking students. But according to some, the debate has more far-reaching ramifications regarding Puerto Rican culture.
We need to emphasize in our youngsters that we come from an island, that we have our own traditions and culture, and it's very important for us to keep those values alive in order for them to know where they're going and who are they. At the same time, we conserving our culture, we have to join forces with the mainstream in the United States.
The controversy continues as the bilingual education debate provides the flashpoint for arguments between Puerto Ricans across the social and political spectrum. On July 25th, 1952, Puerto Rico went from being a United States possession to a commonwealth, or as Governor Luis Muñoz Marin called it, a new kind of statehood. It allowed for local self-government and stipulated permanent U.S. citizenship for all Puerto Ricans. It does not, however, give Puerto Ricans voting representation in Congress, the right to vote for a president, or say in foreign affairs. Puerto Rican loyalties remain a source of conflict. While some swear allegiance to the nation of Puerto Rico, others have given their lives for Old Glory. From World War I to the famous 65th Regiment, which received recognition by serving heroically in the Korean conflict, Puerto Ricans have made the ultimate sacrifice. In that war, Puerto Ricans had the highest ratio of casualties. The tradition of service continued in Vietnam, Persian Gulf, and other recent conflicts.
Yo vivo tan orgulloso de la nación americana que si tengo que volver otra vez a la guerra.
I live so proud of the USA that if I have to go back again to fight, I'll go back free. If you give me, I should give back. The USA has been so good to us that today we can't complain. We went to the front without fear. We went knowing we may never return.
But since the first battles between the Spanish and the Taínos, there have also been Puerto Ricans who have resisted outside governance. Independentistas today still admire Pedro Alviso Campos, who fought against American colonial rule from the 1930s to the 50s. Alviso Campos was arrested for conspiring to overtake the government.
In Washington, D.C., ruthless, fanatic violence erupted in the halls of Congress. 3 men and a woman believed to be members of the Puerto Rican nationalist gang that in November 1950 attempted the assassination of President Truman opened fire from the visitors' gallery of the House of Representatives. 5 congressmen were hit. To Irving Forrest, Rafael Miranda, Mrs. Lolita Lebron, Andre Cordero, the gun wielders, and to their accomplices goes the evil distinction of having perpetrated a criminal outrage almost unique in America's history.
While most independentista activity is nonviolent political organizing, a dramatic episode in Connecticut grabbed headlines in 1983. Security guard Victor Herena allegedly took part in a $7.1 million armed robbery. It funded a pro-independence group, Los Macheteros. The West Hartford Wells Fargo heist is yet to be solved. Herena has yet to be arrested, and some say nationalist concerns of a frustrated element of the Puerto Rican population are yet to be resolved.
The most important issue that faces the Puerto Rican community in Puerto Rico and in the United States is the issue of the status. So I don't think that until we resolve the issue of the status, we can begin to deal seriously with the problems that we face here.
I think that's true because the colonial politics always get in the middle of dealing, for example, with economic problems, social problems in the island, and political strife.
The nation of Puerto Rico, like every other nation, has the right to self-determination, and self-determination as defined by the United Nations can only mean independence.
Independence is an issue of politics and economics. Politically, Puerto Ricans will be able to control their own destiny.
For us here, I don't see it having an impact. If the island was to decide that we should become an independent country, it would, of course, affect our status, as citizens. In that respect, I see that it would be important. But for us here, I think it's important to be educated, to become a part of what is happening, to get involved in the political process.
The argument for statehood, as stateholders put it, is achieving more presence and a certain degree, as they put it, of political power in Congress.
The cost would be enormous to the federal government. In addition to which, Puerto Rico with its present population would have a congressional delegation larger than that of 27 states.
For Commonwealth, as it happens, they try to mix the ingredients of the advantages of statehood as well as independence. The slogan for them is the best of both worlds. Puerto Rico remains culturally autonomous. At the same time, it can attract American investments.
In a November 1993 plebiscite in which Puerto Ricans voted between statehood, a more autonomous Commonwealth, or independence, Puerto Ricans favored Commonwealth. But political observers suggest as long as polls at least show 10% of island Puerto Ricans favoring independence, neither the statehood or Commonwealth movement will be able to put the status issue to bed once and for all.
The Latin Kings have been quietly working the streets of our state since early 1991 in what might be considered one of the most intensive recruitment drives in gang history, targeting both boys and girls. They recruited boys' clubs, parks, anywhere kids hang out, even our schools.
Recta final. Abro los ojos, me levanto, veo el vocero. 10% de la paz es cero. Crímenes, violaciones, mucha malicia. Y no me entero de las buenas noticias. La culpa es de...
The lack of opportunities in Connecticut has given birth to increasing social problems such as drug and gang-related violence, often involving the Puerto Rican community.
I've had to go to each classroom and talk about how to avoid a rapist. Many of them have heard gunfire all night long. They live in fear and in pain.
Without jobs, many have resorted to the safety net of entitlement programs. At the Mount Pleasant Housing Project in New Britain, recipients of unemployment benefits, welfare, and training programs say they prefer the alternative, jobs. But Monserrate says she was laid off after being injured on the job. Gladys Navedo recently received a diploma to compete in what she learned was an exclusive man's world, auto mechanics. And Teresa Cardona says welfare is a matter of survival.
You came from Puerto Rico looking for a better place to live. You want to go to college, you want something better for yourself and for your kid. But right here, right now, there ain't no jobs. The economy is not good. So we have to depend on welfare, otherwise we'll go starving. They look at you if you are Hispanic, they look at you if you are black, they look at you if you are a woman. There's a lot of, prejudice too. I don't want to be in welfare. I want to get out. I just need a chance.
Ahora la mayoría de los puertorriqueños que están viniendo a los Estados Unidos buscando un mejor futuro porque se han preparado y no están bien pagos en su país.
Nowadays, the majority of the Puerto Ricans coming to the United States are looking for a better job and come prepared. They weren't well paid in their country, or they couldn't take advantage of what they studied and worked for. And here, there are jobs. I've always dreamed of having my own home where my girls can feel safe. and I want to secure their future.
A growing number of Puerto Ricans believe securing the future will depend on their ability to put down roots. But detractors assert Puerto Ricans have not committed themselves, failing to develop a strong voting bloc.
It is an interesting dilemma because in Puerto Rico, voting has often been called the national sport, okay? So nobody misses an election. I think about my grandmother. On that day, I think she's 90 or something, and she'll never miss an election.
I think a lot has got to do with the fact that people are so disfranchised and so apart from the political system that people don't see an answer through their political leaders. And oftentimes people have been just completely swindled by their own political leaders.
Nevertheless, Puerto Ricans continue to try and make a place for themselves in Connecticut. They boast about having a federal judge, Jose Cabranes, who was twice recommended for a seat on the Supreme Court. They talk about having the largest elected Puerto Rican state representation, except for New York. Ultimately, it's political power that many believe will help bring solutions to the community's social problems.
The Puerto Rican community in the United States will grow and continue to grow so that by early in the next century, there will be more Puerto Ricans living on the mainland than on the island. And that's an important factor. The implications for that are politically, there will be increasing representation. I see it as a challenge for the Puerto Rican community. A challenge to deal with the strength that it could generate with its increasing numbers and its increasing concentration in what we might label middle-sized cities, like Hartford here in Connecticut.
It is incumbent upon those of us that are in leadership positions to make sure that we advocate for programs to provide stability to people here. And if you provide a good job, you provide a Puerto Rican family with home ownership opportunities, it is my experience that they stay here and they become an integral part of the Puerto Rican community here in Connecticut.
Through history, people that have endured certain pains usually come out stronger.
Cardona organized her neighbors into a block watch to fight drug dealers.
Right now, if you look behind 10 years, this is better now.
Yes, sir.
Because we don't got the drugs, we don't got the shooting, the burning cars, stolen car. We don't have it right now, not as much as we have it 10 years ago. So we all together, we make a difference.
But sometimes making a difference and becoming a success in the U.S. has its price. John Soto operates Magnet Industries, a multi-million-dollar company which services the defense industry and employs many Puerto Ricans.
I see many people that's successful, they shut the world out. And they do not, they enjoy their material things, but they give up a lot of the spiritual values. And this is something has always been a problem with me. I have never set out just simply to make money. I consider making just simply money having a pocket full of change. I have some spiritual values, which again explains the Puerto Rican culture, that our people have the strength enough to be able to succeed and retain their inner person.
Maria Sanchez's humble beauty pageant of yesteryear today continues as an event where all Puerto Ricans gather to commemorate their achievements as a people.
I feel that I have a strong history behind my birth, that I have a strong culture. We have some great music, some great talent. We have people with a lot of sensitivities to our fellow man. It's a small island, people live closer together. Because you live in that environment, people become more humanized.
The Puerto Rican community, is a community that one learns from and sees and relating to life. The idea of sharing with other people, it's very pronounced. Even little children, they go to a party, a 5-year-old, and he wants to take home a piece of candy for his 3-year-old brother. That type of sharing, and even the expression, mi casa es su casa. North Americans don't say that. My house is your house. You know, you're welcome at my house, but my house is not your house. You know?
Traditionally, Puerto Ricans are diverse, and their ways of life are growing ever more varied. Many live in cities, others moved out into the suburbs, while all share the same culture. Some are patriotic, and some are rebellious, some wealthy, and some impoverished, some Catholic, some Pentecostal. A true melting pot which began on a small island the size of Connecticut.
We're so used to lumping people and to making generalizations, and I think that we need to take a look at each individual group as a group with a very distinct history and a very distinct historical moment in terms of when they arrived here and what was there and how things have changed or not changed for them. With the Puerto Rican, we have somebody like myself who has been living in the United States for 45 years, and Puerto Ricans who will come here tomorrow for the very first time. Some of us speak only English, some of us speak only Spanish, some of us speak both and feel very comfortable in it. So that there's a difference in terms of how we have experienced or are experiencing Connecticut.
There's a lot more to the Puerto Rican experience than what is seen in film or media accounts. In many ways, the Puerto Rican experience is similar to that of groups who came before them. But it is a distinctive story, challenging preconceived ideas of racial makeup or typical immigration. Whether in Meriden or Aguada, Puerto Ricans enjoy the privileges of U.S. citizenship as well as an accessible Puerto Rican heritage.
I love Connecticut. I straddle both cultures. I'm at home in both cultures. I'm a citizen of the world. I see wonderful things in everybody and everything. And I think I'm right.
Knowledge of the past gives us a greater understanding of a growing and constantly developing Puerto Rican community in Connecticut. As important, it offers inspiration and guidance to Puerto Ricans who call Connecticut home.
That Puerto Rican feeling always calls to me. It's the green of the mountains and the smell of the sea. It's that Puerto Rican feeling that's been calling me again. A warm and sunny feeling like the smile of a friend. It's a free and easy feeling, that's the Caribbean way. The sun will shine tomorrow and bring back yesterday. It's that Puerto Rican feeling that's been calling out my name, oh, my name, calling out to me. Let the music take you. Oh, let it take you there. Oh, let my music take you. Oh, let it take you there. It's that Puerto Rican feeling that's been calling me again. A warm and sunny feeling like the smile of a friend. Let my music take you, yeah, let it take you there, let it take you there. It's a free and easy feeling, that's the Caribbean way. The sun will shine tomorrow and bring back yesterday. It's that Puerto Rican feeling that's been calling out my name, oh, my name, calling out to me. Oh, I miss my island by the sea. Listen to me, yeah. Can you feel that Puerto Rican feeling? Oh, I'm so proud, I'm so proud. Oh, yeah. Feel it, feel it, feel it, feel it. Why don't you feel it with me, people?
The production of Puerto Rican Passages and its related public programming have been made possible in part by grants from the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, Hartford Foundation for Public Giving, Greater Bridgeport Area Foundation, and Fundación Puertorriqueña de las Humanidades. To learn more about the many public programs planned for this fall by the Connecticut Humanities Council about the Puerto Rican experience in Connecticut, please call the Humanities Council at 203-685-8255. 2260.